ladies and gentlemen. Welcome into another awesome, fantastic, and amazing episode of Facts Not Feelings with the one and only Tom Kline. Woohoo!
The crowd goes wild.
Woohoo! Yeah, I need to have like applause in the background for you, Tom. Anyone that doesn't know you, first off, they should. I don't know what you people are doing. Get to know Tom Kline. He is a freaking genius. And the more I get to know you, Tom, the more I'm just like, hey, I just need to first off, shut up and listen to you because you are so brilliant. Every time I talk to you, I'm like, I just learned something new. I just learned something new. So this is why everyone go listen to Tom Kline and get to know him. You are just, Thomas with his 30 years in the car ownership experience. And now you ventured off to Vantage Point, correct? You've been with him. When did you start Vantage Point?
Better Vantage Point started, it's okay, in December of 2019. So after we sold the dealerships, that's when I started it because I found there's a need for it. So here I am.
Yes. And I'm just going to kind of go over some of these accolades here. And there are so many of them that I had to write some of them down so I wouldn't forget here. But you were recently at presenting a GLBA presentation that I always have to slow down when I say this because I always go like NAD. I'm like, no, NIADA presentation, a national policy conference. And then, like I said, you have 30 years of dealership ownership experience. And now with a Better Vantage experience, Better Vantage Point. Why can't I say that right, Tom? I don't know why.
Maybe you need a Better Vantage Point.
That's what it is. Or sleep. That could be it as well. Very possible. So we'll get into, today we're going to be talking about not just GLBA. Well, that's the main point of it. What it is, why it's so important, the good, the bad, the ugly of it, the ADF XML portion of it, the all-inclusive, just breaking it down to anybody can understand it. And why, in particular, I wanted to speak with you about it is you're an expert on this, but with your company, what you do is you dealership disputes, your compliance, risk mitigation, and your consulting is all you do. And so you're living and breathing this. I remember we were talking, I think it was last week, you go, well, we do risk mitigation. It's just kind of evolved now because GLB's here. That's what we're doing. So right. Today, like I said, there's so many parts of GLBA. And if you try to consume it, well, you should have been doing it earlier on. And I know you and I have been screaming this from the rooftops for some times here. But if you try to at the very beginning, you just be like, there's so much to this. I want to break it down into little bite-sized pieces for our audience of what it is. How can I go about doing it? And I know we've got this looming December 9th expiration date on everything. So I just want to start with the basics of what it is first off and kind of build on that and educate our audience on this a little bit, Tom. So sure. I just grant you the floor on this, sir.
We're gonna break it into fun size pieces,
yeah,
right?
Little bite-sized pieces, yes, fun size. Little Kit Kat sizes.
little Snicker bars, little Milky Ways.
Yes.
So the Gramm Leach Bliley Act originally went into be a law, I think in 2003 originally. So it's almost 20 years old. And last October, November, they updated the regulations and now dealerships are required to comply by December the 9th. And to quote an old employee of mine, whose name was Hank, he said, you don't have to agree, but you do have to comply.
Yes.
So I guess the first component, the first and kind of most complicated and biggest component is that all the data that you have, so that's data from your CRM, data from the DMS, data from your websites, data flowing any which way that you have it at the dealership now has to be encrypted, both at rest and in transit. And so there's been not enough conversation actually about the ADF format, which ADF is, if I remember, is Auto Lead Data Format, which was started specifically for the auto industry, if I'm correct. Is that right, Brooke?
Yeah, I also think of the A and Kevin Fry were joking, like the A and ADF stands for archaic. Also, I think we like to call it. So yes. But I believe that your actual acronym is correct. Yes.
Okay. So the auto lead data format. So that's how most information flows in the car business. And now that has to be encrypted, which means that your DMS provider, your CRM provider, your website provider, really what you should do is go through your payables list, have your payables clerk go through all the expenses in which you pay for internet expenses, and any of those things are going to have to be encrypted starting December the 9th. And that's a big task. So that's why I'm starting with that particular
Huge.
one.
Huge. And I'll add to that is that when you start thinking about how these, I'll rewind here a little bit, how the form comes into you and where that information is going, it gets a little daunting to say the least, because when that lead comes into you, it's not just going to you, the dealer. And that's where I think sometimes you're like, oh, wait, it doesn't? No, that if it's a third party lead, it's going to you. It might be going to another dealership. If it's an OEM lead, the OEM has it now and it's coming to you. And then let's say, okay, I got the lead. It goes into my CRM. Maybe it's going to DMS, should be going to, and then from there, okay, I might be a salesperson or in the BDC. Well, I get that. And then my manager forwards it back to me. So now you're forwarding all the information. Well, then that auto trader gets it, and auto trader sending it to all the other places. Well, now I have constant contact. Well, constant contact. Well, I'm going to upload this stuff here, and then they're sending it here. And so there's just this spider web of where all this information is going. And it's okay. So how are we getting all this? And there have been some people that have been talking about this. I know that you and I have been talking about this. Atool's been talking about this. Orbee's been talking about this. I know Brian Pash. Who else is kind of working towards this? And there's not a fix right now per se, but who's trying to work to a resolution on this?
So let me just fill in a quick definition based on what you just said.
Okay.
So the definition of PII, or personally identifiable information, has changed.
Yes.
So that's an important nuance here, because now your home address, your cell number, and your email address are all considered PII. So for those of us who are over 20 years old, we say to ourselves, wait a minute, there was a phone book not too long ago.
Yes.
And the answer to that is yes, but that's now all considered PII, and you have to protect it. So you mentioned emailing the information starting December the 9th. You can't email any PII unless your email is encrypted. So I think that as a kind of a basis is important to know. Now, as far as who is working on this, other than the list you just made, I'm not sure.
Right.
In terms of when we're talking about just the data. If we're talking about other software that supports this, which I know we're going to get to in a few minutes, there are some other companies that support parts of the Gramm Leach Bliley in different ways. But as far as the data goes, I am not aware of any other companies that are working on this at the moment.
So before we jump into the next part, which you just mentioned, I want to make it very, very clear. When someone says that we are making you 100% compliant, we just said that if they don't do the ADF XML portion, you're not 100% compliant. So
Well, there's no, let me just say it more broadly, Brooke. There is no one solution that
thank you.
can make you 100% compliant on this.
No.
As examples, and I know we're going to talk about it later, you have to do a risk assessment of your IT infrastructure. You have to check for security vulnerabilities. You have to check for security patches. And none of that is done in a software program. That is just your IT guy in good old-fashioned shoe leather, walking around the dealership, seeing what problems there are, right? So there is no one solution or one person or one company that has an all-in-one solution that I'm aware of that can do all this. Now, I do know there are claims of some folks doing it, but those are claims as far as I know.
Yes.
Happy to be proven wrong. Please reach out to me by email or LinkedIn or whatever. I'm happy to be wrong, because if there is a solution, I'm happy to tout it and send some customers your way.
Oh, that makes two of us. Two of us.
But as far as I know, which is why people are asking me questions about this, you have to parse it out, and you have to kind of work on this in a logical way. So the first way, I think, is securing your data reaching out to Brian Davis, Atul Patel, Peter Fong, any of the folks over at Orbee. Orbee is kind of a central hub, if you will, for those people who are watching who don't know, that will help you take control of your data. So it's now first party data instead of third, and in doing so will help you encrypt it both at transit and at rest. So
and then first party data, just once again, I might want to make this so everyone understands we're not throwing around crazy. If we say a crazy acronym, I'm going to try as much as possible to go back and understand, to make it as elementary as possible. First party data be your data. That is in your CRM. Data. That is your DMS. That is your data. It's not something off of some list you bought or some whatever. That is your data. That's what first party data is.
Correct.
Okay.
And a lot of dealers seed that data to these third parties who hold it, and then some of them resell it after they give it to you, perhaps at a cost, and then after lots and lots of begging. Yes. Okay, so I think we kind of said a ground of what it is, but not getting into nitty gritty. So let's go over some of like the rules of it, some of the going into a little bit deeper of what it is, and we'll get into the software, but let's go into some of the rules. And you have an incredible document that you sent over, and I was just like, okay, I knew some of this, but man, there's a lot of nitty gritty. And so like the compliance management system, who's responsible? What is that? What is the compliance management system? Well, the compliance management system doesn't specifically speak to Gramm Leach Bliley, but the compliance management system is something that's required by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to make sure that you are documenting, logging any consumer complaints that come into the dealership and how you resolve them. So if any regulator walks into your business, whether it's the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the attorneys general of each state, because each state has an attorney general that get involved with car dealers, politicians. Everybody loves to regulate a car dealer. Yes. Unfortunately. Yes. So and so you should be able to show these regulators what you do to resolve consumer complaints. I always say 70 to 80% of a dealership's problems start with consumer or employee complaints, and that's who goes to the regulators, and that's who causes problems and goes to lawyers. So if they ever come in to audit you, that's if you can show them that you're handling your consumer complaints, then, as I like to say, you're going to write a 4-figure check instead of a bigger check than that. Now, I've also been asked very frequently, Brooke, are they going to, on December the 10th, are people going to swarm into the dealership and make sure you're compliant on the Gramm Leach Bliley Act? I'm not the Federal Trade Commission, so I don't know. That's my business guy disclaimer. So I don't know, but I foresee the way this happens is that if you've got a lot of consumer complaints, that they are going to come in as a result of the consumer complaints. And while they're there, they're going to say, show me your policies, show me your procedures, show me your books, show me your documentation, show me everything. So I mean, similar to Napleton Automotive when they were fined $10 million earlier in the year, and Tate Automotive that started many years ago. These all started with customer complaints. So I think that's how it starts. They may have a Gramm Leach Bliley task force. I don't know. It hasn't been publicized yet, but I don't think that's how it starts. I think it starts with complaints, and enough customers complain to the FTC. I think then they come in. I wrote an article, by the way, which might interest you, and it's called "Let the Government Be Your Customer Service Department." And what I mean by that is, if you don't take care of your customers, the government's going to come in and make sure they're taken care of.
And that's going to lead to a hefty fine, which leads me to the next one. Before we get into the other questions, so with the GLB, these fines are not, hey, I'm just going to, make an app and it will go away. No, these fines are hefty. So talk a little bit what's going to get them in trouble, and then the fines that ensued with those, with getting yourself in trouble.
Sure. So fines start at, as I understand it, at $46,517
I see.
per violation. Now,
Yeah.
nobody knows what what the definition of a violation is, right? So if you have 10 names that leak, then is that 460,000, right?
Yeah.
It's unknown, and I think they probably left it that way to have the potentiality of bigger fines, be there to dissuade you from non-compliance, or what I say is willful non-compliance, which means you're not even trying to comply.
Yeah.
So that's where the fines start. And I don't remember part two of your question.
So part two, so there's so much to this. So breaking it down of what are the main, because we could go on and on. I know you and I could talk forever about this. So what are some main bullet points of the GLBA Act, the FTC privacy rules, and for auto dealers? What are some of those main points that dealers can, if they haven't done it, they should be doing it? But hey, what should you be doing right now?
So the first thing is the data. I think the data, making sure your data is secure. I think that's absolutely the first thing. The second thing is multi-factor authentication. So MFA, which is a pain in the neck, it's inconvenient, it's not fun, it slows things down, which none of us like. But multi-factor authentication is making sure that you are who you say you are. And I've had some of my dealers install a product called Cisco, see the big company Cisco. The name of the product is Duo, and that lets you MFA into your computer in a kind of an easy way, and it's not too burdensome and not too onerous. There's some other products I've seen which are not great. They don't function very well, and people get super frustrated. Don't ask my wife about this because her company has a product which she does not like at all, and I hear lots of expletives every time she has to try to get into her computer. So I think that's the second thing. So once you've got control of your data, and you're using MFA to get into your computers, I think education is the next thing, and you're required to educate all of your employees. I talked to a dealer this morning who said, "Now I just have to educate my F&I and sales guys and sales managers on this, right?" And I said, "No, it has to be every employee." So one of the items of education, for example, that we talked about a few minutes ago was the personally identifiable information, and you can no longer email customer information back and forth. You can't text it. You have to do that through a secure portal, and there are software programs that provide that kind of secure portal. Um, so making sure that everybody understands, I would have them sign a policy that says, "I understand I can no longer send PII through email or
Texting.
text." Thank you.
Gotcha.
Interestingly, supposedly, for those who still have fax machines, that's supposedly secure. I don't know who has a fax machine anymore. I certainly don't. Uh, that's gone away with the dodo bird.
Yeah,
But
right.
doctors' offices, as an example, like to
Yeah.
use that, and okay, so that's doctors' offices. Um, but I mean, I think the keys to success here, kind of touching base on some of the slides that I sent you, is making sure your people, your processes, your policies, and technology are all together. So I mentioned earlier, there are software programs. There's 4 or 5 software programs on the market that will help you with about 30% of the Gramm Leach Bliley Act. And what they do for you is they help you with your vendor management. So by vendor management, we're going back to the websites, talking about the websites and anybody who sends data back and forth. So all those vendors have to sign acknowledgments that they're encrypting the data. You have to keep that information, and on a yearly basis, you have to go back and make sure they're still encrypting the data. And you have to document all that. You have to document where your security vulnerabilities are and what you're doing about it. You have to document the employee training. Some of these programs have, for example, 12 modules that people have to complete, which keeps it top of mind awareness, phishing, social engineering, all of those kinds of issues and problems. So you have to train on those. As from an IT infrastructure perspective, you have to do a risk assessment where your vulnerabilities are. Then you either have to do what's called continuous monitoring, which is having somebody sit behind a glass panel looking at all your data flowing and see if there's been a breach. You either have to have continuous monitoring or vulnerability and phishing tests done. So it's a lot less expensive to do the vulnerability and phishing testing than it is to do the continuous monitoring. So I'll pause there.
No, yeah, and I think
that was a lot.
and I would say, and I'm curious with that is how they hold them accountable, because I've been in multiple dealerships where it's, oh yeah, we'll do the phishing tests, but no one follows up with it. So they click on something, they're supposed to do the phishing test, and no one follows up with it. So
Yeah.
how is it that they're actually going to enforce that?
So some of the software programs will throw you right back to retraining. So if you click on
Mhm,
one of the bad links, you get sent to the penalty box and you have to
mhm.
retrain and then take a test to make sure that you know. So some of those programs I mentioned have that kind of capability.
Yeah, and so I've definitely worked for companies that would do that. I'm just curious at a dealership level, are they going to actually? Because even if you get sent there, if at a management level they just say, "All right, we're going to do this," but nah, we're not really going to do it. They're just doing it to check a box because they feel they're being forced into this. Just because you get sent there, you really don't have to do it unless they're locking them out of their email. How else are they going to? I mean, or take their pay away if it's not
Right.
that big of a priority to them, like, oh, this is just, BS. We're being forced to do this, like, whatever. If the employee doesn't do it, what happens?
Right. Well, this is going to require, it's a great question, and it's going to require kind of a cultural shift
Yep.
at the stores. And I see a lot of stores, and that goes from small or single point stores up to stores or organizations that have 30 stores. And the first question when they call me and we talk about, generally I get well, we have compliance locked down and don't worry about that. We don't need to talk about that. We just want to talk about this. To which I say, okay, well, let me just ask you one question I said, do you have a compliance clerk or compliance manager at each location? And Brooke has the answer to this question, which is
Hell
no,
no. Hell
generally
no.
no. And so unless you have a audit function behind your compliance program, you don't have a compliance program. Somebody has to check behind it. Whether you hire a company like me or you install your compliance program and then you have people on the ground and you have somebody train those compliance folks so that they know what's going on. Somebody has to be in charge, and all of those people have to report to the owner. And part of the Gramm Leach Bliley Act, the new regulations, is there has to be annual reports to the board of what the activity was, what happened, what training happened, kind of a holistic perspective of what's going on. And so somebody has to be in charge, Brooke, is the answer. And to go back to the old adage of you manage what you monitor, somebody has to monitor this in order to manage it.
So with the whole managing thing, that comes to a point of insurance. Well, I don't need insurance, or do I have enough insurance? Well, do my vendor partners and business partners, do they have enough insurance? And then, so speak to, because sometimes, I mean, I'll go to a story. This is back in, I think 2000, it might have been 2016, maybe, I don't know, something like that. And there's a dealership group, and their one store got hit with ransomware, and it was because they didn't have the Wi-Fi pass. They didn't have a Wi-Fi password. And so that's how they got hit. So I go, okay, make sure all of you, and they paid it. This was ransomware was like on the uprise, whatever. I go, cool. So are the rest of your stores, do they have a password? Oh yeah, we're good. 3 weeks later, boom, their sister store gets hit. Why? They didn't have a Wi-Fi password. I go, you guys just make it like one. I don't care. Make it. I prefer that it's something like very strong, but just put something there. And they got hit. So in a matter of a month, they shelled out a ton of money. I go, what, you guys? So going back to insurance, like you can have the insurance, but if you're not doing what you should be doing, I'm going to let you speak to that.
So that's about 22 questions I heard you ask in that one. That's okay. Let me break it down. Let me break it down. So first of all, if you're practicing good risk mitigation or good risk transference, the first thing you do is check and see if your vendors have cyber insurance. Most have, even though most of their business is done through the cloud and through the internet, most have $1 million, which is nothing. In today's day and age, it's nothing. So if you're practicing good risk mitigation techniques, you're going to check to see if your vendors have cyber insurance. Make sure that they have ransomware insurance. Usually, if you have $1 million of insurance, the only amount that's covered by ransomware is usually a sub-limit, which is usually like $250,000. So nothing, especially considering a group up in Northern Virginia last year was ransomware for $7 million. So because auto dealers are targets, that's the whole point of the Gramm Leach Bliley Act is we have everyone's information. We have all their information. We have their name, their social, their birthday, their pay stubs, their job information. I mean, there's nothing really that we don't have. So you check to make sure if your vendors have cyber insurance. And if they don't, you can use leverage on them, negotiate with them, have them increase their limits, have them sign that in the case of a breach, their insurance is primary. That's a lot of work, what I just said in 30 seconds. However, and then you need to decide what your risk appetite is for you having cyber insurance. Let's talk about risk appetite for a minute. Risk appetite is you understand what the risks are and you're comfortable that whatever insurance or whatever plan you have in place will ameliorate or stop any problems, right? Because in risk mitigation, there's really two different parts of it. Part one is preventing the problem. Part two is if I do have a problem, how am I going to solve it? So those are the two pieces really of enterprise risk mitigation. So on the first part, what are you going to do to not have a problem? That's the Gramm Leach Bliley Act. Are you going to encrypt your information? Are you going to make sure credit apps and STIPs aren't laying around on desks that anybody could go and snap a photo? And
that never happens at a dealership. Never.
Every time I go into a dealership, one of my clients, I'm snapping photos before I see the dealer principal. Let them see what's going on. But then, as an example that I'm using these days, assume with the DMS, assume with the CRM that you have records of 250,000 customers, which is not, it's probably low, if anything, right? Between service and parts and sales, new and used, and F&I and every other thing that goes on lease. Some dealerships have leasing companies. Let's say they have 250,000 records, and let's say they have a data breach, which is the whole point of this. So if you do quick math, and the FTC or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau makes you do credit monitoring for those 250,000 that were breached, credit monitorings are $8 or $9 a month. That's $100 a year. $100 a year times 250,000 names is $25 million. So when you talk about risk appetite, is that a risk you're willing to take as a dealer?
Yeah, and I used to be a little bit better at math, and I had way too many concussions. But if I'm doing the math on that, which is, like I said, used to be a little bit better at math, you might be a little low on that, just given the complexity of everything that's included on that. Because if you're doing that plus, I don't know, You're the expert on this.
No, I mean, I'm saying that's not a high number, and I don't know any
Yeah.
dealership. I don't know that any dealership that has 25 million. I've never
No.
heard of it, never seen it.
Mm-mm.
It doesn't exist. The highest I've seen is 10 million, which is a gracious plenty.
Yeah.
But it's not my 30 or 40 million dollars at stake, right? That's the dealers has to make that
Hmm.
decision. Some
Yeah.
dealers are okay with that, and they're
Or
like, I'm okay with having a million, and if I have a problem, I have a problem. I'll deal with
I'll
it.
deal with it. It hasn't happened, as you said. It hasn't happened yet. A
Hasn't
case of the
happened
yet.
yet. Don't get a case of the yets. Hasn't
Yes.
happened yet. Hasn't happened yet.
So
Uh,
you had said something earlier about customer complaints. And so my question to you about that is, are reputation management companies enough? Because they don't see what's on Reddit. They don't see what's on Twitter. They don't see what's on all the other platforms. There are companies that do, but those reputation management companies don't see that. So where does that fall into all this?
so I think, with all due respect to all those reputation management companies, what they don't do, which is a problem as far as I'm concerned, is who's picking up the phone and calling the customer to get them in to solve the problem. Right? The reputation management companies are great at saying, "Dear Mrs. Jones, we're so sorry we let you down. Please reach out to us and give us the details of your problem." When the customer just listed 9 paragraphs of what you did wrong, right? So it comes across as insincere. And there's two problems with that. Number one is everybody reads reviews. Everybody reads reviews. So people read reviews before they buy their cars. And so you come across as insincere to new car buyers. That's a problem because you're losing sales as a result of you not handling these complaints. But then if you're not fixing the problem, that customer's just spinning out there and is upset with you. And so I've seen customers post across 8 or 9 different internet platforms. That's when they go to the attorneys general. I've mentioned before that I know of a class action lawsuit that happens that started in church, where one lady said to the next, "Hey, did you get screwed by this dealer? Because I did," and off they were to the races, right? And that was a $7 to $10 million problem, as I remember. Um, so just posting that you're sorry and we'll do better next time, that's not
Here,
reputation management.
here's a pair
That's
of free windshield wipers. Here you go. Yeah.
that's just posting. That's posting for posting's sake. It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't help the customer. It doesn't help the dealership. I don't even really think it helps in general because people see that all the time and it looks insincere to me.
Yeah, and yeah, yes. And if you're, I'll just leave it at that before I go on a rabbit hole on
Okay,
that
Brooke,
one.
you can say it.
I was going to go down a rabbit hole of just some. There are trends, and I've seen it with. It doesn't matter what industry it is. There's a trend of, okay, well, if I complain, because our culture is we complain and we're just going to vent, because the ones that have a good experience, they don't say it. So if I just complain, oh, I'm going to get something for free. Well, that's then you just train your customers to bitch and get stuff for free. That shouldn't be the way. Figure out, okay, what actually went wrong, because it may be something maybe something did go wrong. They're just looking for a handout. So figure out, okay, did we actually do something wrong? Is there something where we can improve our processes? Because I want to get better. I just don't
Right.
want to give out handouts and cut into our gross profit or cut into service or cut into whatever it is. Figure out what happened. Where can we improve? And that's just, I mean, that goes with any industry, figure out what happened and figure out, talk to both sides. Does something actually happen and go wrong? Or is this person just looking for a handout because they want to complain and post everywhere? So
And there's two good points that you bring out there. Number one is listen to the feedback on the internet, because the customers may be telling you, as I'm going to use this as an example, that if you've got 3 complaints about a salesman, where there's smoke, there's fire, right?
yep.
So use the feedback as information to operate your business. I
Yeah.
think we all get complacent and tired of listening to that, and it's just another customer complaint, when in reality that can help us run our business.
Yes.
Secondly, when you do have those who are trying to take advantage, I still think you have to satisfy them in some way. I'm not telling you have to give them what they want to get, but I think you have to satisfy them and then consider putting in place a process where whoever that person is that's handling it will get the customer to sign a release of all claims so they
Mhm.
don't come back to you a second time and
Mhm.
say, well, now that you fixed my tires, I mean, I had a customer come back to me 13 years after we did a paint job in our body shop and say we did a terrible paint job because look at how the paint is flaking, right?
What?
So I satisfied the customer, but I didn't give them a new paint job.
No, no.
Um, but
I know.
they signed a release.
Yeah.
I can assure you. So I think it's important to just to make an internal distinguishment between that which is not based in reality and that which is based in reality, and you can have two different procedures to handle those.
Yes. Okay, so when it comes to employees, like when it's with this, you now have to have a way that employees can channel and a mechanism for them to bring complaints to management. So my question with that is, how do you ensure that it's a safe place for them to do that? Once again, that it's not, it's a culture shift. I'm fully aware of that, which is a little difficult in some circumstances. But so maybe I don't, maybe you
Well, a
can't
lot
answer
difficult.
this.
Well, a lot difficult in some circumstances.
So how, I mean, how can is just having a GLB, okay, well, you got to do it because you got to do it. Is that really going to happen?
Well, I don't think the Gramm Leach Bliley Act really interfaces the customer complaint issue. It can if there's a breach, right? You don't want to call a third generation customer and say, hey, your information's now on the dark web.
Hmm.
Sorry about that. You don't want to have that conversation either publicly, privately, or otherwise with the media or whoever it is. Um,
No.
but you know, it needs the customer complaints need to be satisfied, and that's just kind of where that is. And you can choose to ignore that or you can choose to embrace it. But I think the paradigm shift comes in when you designate someone to say, this person is going to handle customer complaints. Sometimes sales complaints can be handled differently than service complaints because of just the nature of those complaints. And I think that's fine if you're going to separate, let the fixed ops guys handle the fixed ops problems and let somebody up in sales handle the sales problems, because generally fixed ops issues aren't but so expensive, right? They can only be the engine blew up, I guess, is kind of probably the maximum service problem in terms of dollars, right? But on the sales side, you know, their average car I read this morning is now up to I think $41,000.
Yeah, something like that.
So you know, somebody doesn't get somebody's stips are false, or they really have a job and you said they didn't, and you repoed their car, and they've got embarrassment and all this other stuff, right? That can add up quickly. And those problems can balloon very quickly. So I think that you have a designated person, they're the ones that vet all the information. They talk to the customer, they talk to everybody internally. They should have a direct line to the dealer or owner and know how much they can spend or can't spend without authorization. And then I think they're the ones who solve that problem. So I think that's kind of how you have to get around that. Uh, though it can be that the sales managers will use that person as their personal customer service department, and that obviously becomes a problem. Just like when used car managers start adding warranties to cars instead of reconditioning them, it's the same kind of thing, right? But that becomes so obvious so quickly that you're able to figure out what's going on there.
And I will add to that that if you are an auto group, one person cannot handle every single.
No,
No.
you have to have somebody at each location.
Yes. So
Somebody has to be empowered to do that.
it is impossible for them to do it. So yeah,
Correct.
yeah, just yeah. Okay, so let's go with we talked a little bit about the having auditing the websites, and there are certain states, and I will leave these states out. They know what states they are, where the DOT wants to be the OEM. They want to be NSERA, and so you'll have NSERA that will say, no, you need to have, and you're website needs to say this, or your pricing is not correct. And the DOT will say, nope, it needs to say this. Now you've got someone else that's your auditor that's taking care of, hey, your website needs to be compliant with X, Y, and Z, so you stay compliant with the GLBA. So what happens when you have differing opinions and views on what is right versus what is wrong post December 9th?
You're talking about for advertising? Is that
For
your question?
yeah, for advertising. Yeah, for advertising and being compliant with advertising laws. Because we like for instance, like Wisconsin is very, very strict. The DOT is, hey, if you have MSRP, you got to show MSRP. Like everything has to be compliant, and they're just very, very strict about it.
Yeah, I think there's two sources of information there that dealers can rely on. Number one, the NADA has a 94-page guide called the NADA Guide to Advertising. And I think if you look at that and you comply with that, number one, and then reach out to your state motor vehicle dealer board, they'll have the regulations written out in some way. I think between those two, you handle the federal and you handle the state very efficiently. But you're right. I mean, for example, Virginia is different than New York.
Mm-hmm.
New York, some fees are included and some fees aren't. But the biggest mistake that I see when I audit websites for advertising violations is something very simple, which is the disclaimer that says plus processing fee, where taxes and tags. The disclaimer's at the bottom of the page of the website, whether it's the VDP or wherever it might show up, but there's no asterisks tying the sales price down to the disclaimer.
Mm-hmm.
And the exposure, the liability exposure there is huge because from an advertising perspective, if there's no asterisks, then it's perceived to be included in the price. So taxes and tags are included in that sales price. So if on an average, that's probably $3,000 every car deal. So if you sell 200 cars a month and then times it by 12, and these numbers get huge in terms of the class action exposure. So that's the biggest advertising mistake I see, and I see it over and over. Very few websites are compliant that way.
Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, I got kind of baptized in this a couple years back. I mean, I knew some stuff, and I was back actually in the dealership world, and I consulted. I was in 300 stores a year, and had never really dove into the compliance part of all of that. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is insane how some of the, once again, Chicago is very bizarre when it comes to how they do stuff. And I can say that living here. And so it's just very interesting to me. I was like, okay, I understand now. And every state's different. So there is, Tom, I could talk to you about this forever. I mean, I still have, from what we are going through, another 20 questions here. But for time's sake, I know we got to wrap this up here.
We can turn this into the Brooke Furniss Late Show if you want.
I know, right? Seriously, the Facts Not Feelings Late Show here. Now, for anyone that has more questions, Tom, I'm going to put this up here. Especially for those that are obviously listening in podcast land here, where can everyone find you? Where can they get more information about you, your Better Vantage Point? I got it right. It took me 7 times, but I got it right there. Where can they find you?
Yeah, the quickest, easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn under Tom Kline. You can certainly reach me by my cell phone, which the number is published everywhere, or my email address, which is tomk, as in Tom Kline, at bettervantagepoint.com. So I'm easily accessible.
He's everywhere. And he does a lot of speaking on this as well. Anytime Tom is speaking as well, take a moment and listen to him. He comes with a wealth of knowledge. So you'll always learn something from this man. So we'll dive into the lightning round here. And so what is your, so much fun. What is your favorite thing to do outside of work when you're not talking about GLBA or risk mitigation? What are you doing outside of work for fun?
I breathe.
That's a good thing. Keep breathing.
I breathe. I sit down. I breathe a little bit. It's really enjoyable. No, I like to I've had a boat most of my life. I don't have a boat right now, both sailboats and power boats, so I enjoy the
Nice.
water a lot. I enjoy hiking, and so those are kind of my I guess it's my seance that I convene with nature and breathe in and out, and sometimes a nap.
Ooh,
Nap is a good activity for me on a Saturday or Sunday.
love
Very
a nap.
decadent, feels great. I recommend it to everyone. I
Things
highly
we did,
recommend naps.
oh, the things we didn't, we like for like hated as a child, and like, no, just let me nap, please, just let me nap, just
Right.
5 minutes, please.
Right. I saw a meme on Facebook last week that said all the things I hated as a child are now my adult goals, right?
Yes,
Napping, staying home, going to bed early.
yes, it's so true, so true. Okay, so aside from napping, let's go into what is your favorite vacation spot? Where are you going? You've got a ticket. Where are you heading to?
Oh gosh, a vacation. I have some favorites.
Okay,
I have a little small mountain place in the Blue Ridge Mountains, so that's probably a favorite, especially this time of year
nice.
because the leaves are starting to turn,
Ooh,
which is my favorite. But I guess some of the best trips I've been on, I took my family to Yellowstone in
oh,
the
nice,
winter, but it was in
nice.
the winter, so it's a whole different experience. Very cold. I think it's -20. It's really cold, but fascinating seeing all those kinds of things. I took my son to um, Hudson Bay up in the Arctic Circle to look at the polar
Wow,
bears many years ago. That
that's
was
awesome.
that was really a fabulous trip. Uh, and then on more of the kind of um, usual thing. I love Italy and love to go drink coffee and get gelato. So any place in Italy, and I do a lot of walking. I enjoy walking. I was in San Francisco recently, and a close friend of mine and I, in 3.5 days, we walked 37 miles.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I just like to walk around, see what's stop, get a cup of coffee, stop, get a loaf of bread, stop, get some ice cream or whatever. So I just like to wander around and just not have a deadline, right? Not have to
Right.
be somewhere.
Walk and nap. Okay, we got it. Walk and
Yeah.
nap. Walk,
Well,
coffee, nap. Gotcha. Or coffee, walk, nap. That's going to go that way. Yeah.
it's okay. Whatever. I actually only drink decaf.
Oh,
That's
really?
yep. I only drink decaf, so I just do it because I like the taste, not because of the caffeine.
All right. Okay. We're learning so much about you, Tom, right now. So much. So
Yes.
much.
Yes. All
Okay.
my secrets.
So the show is named Facts Not Feelings. So whether it's in your personal life or in professional life, what are you constantly distinguishing facts from feelings?
I think it's in both my personal and professional life. I think when you first of all, the connotation there is a little bit of like when you get something bad or there's something not great happening, how do you react?
Mm,
And I think what I do for myself is I try to take a deep breath. I try to find out what the facts are so that I'm not reacting or overreacting or underreacting to whatever the information I'm getting. Because usually the information that's provided to you, whether it's somebody telling you you're an idiot or whatever, it doesn't matter what it is, it's usually not the real information. The first information you get and you have to parse through it. You have to pick through and find out really what the information is. Once you know, and there's only one reality, right? There's only one set of facts in every situation. And you may not know the facts. And so you have to pick through the information or do some research or find out or whatever you have to do, depending on whether it's personal or professional, and try to find out. Once I have that information, then I feel like I can react to it. Because until you don't know. And so that's kind of, I think that's an answer to your question, isn't it?
oh yeah, I love it. I, if only more people would do that, Tom. If only
Yeah.
more people would do that. Take a breath, figure out what's the truth and what is real, and then respond. But too quickly, it's It's like, no, just calm down, take a breath, take a breath. No, I love it. I love it. Okay, let's go with kind of a little bit on that same one. As a disruptor in the industry, what is, because you're definitely doing that. I mean, you're doing something that not a lot of people are doing. What is the hardest or best lesson that you've learned?
Patience.
Hmm.
Patience is a good one.
Yeah.
So and I'll follow on to the last question, which is when you get information about a business problem, don't react to it because you really don't know what it is or what you're dealing with. And so patience is important. And I think the add on to that is the way and the timing of your communication about that item. So if it's somebody who works for you screwed something up, how you react to that person. When do you bring them into your office? Do you have all the information? In other words, how you deal with that person from an interpersonal perspective is super important, and that you know what you're dealing with, because I see far too often managers, dealers, doesn't matter who, they fly off the handle and they don't even know what they're talking about yet. There's nothing to talk about yet. They're going high and left when there's nothing to go high and left about yet.
Yeah.
There's always time to go high and left, right? You can go high and left. That's no problem. But before you do, the timing and the tone of your communication, I think, is vitally important. And just to take 30 seconds on tone, I think you can have conversation with anybody about anything, but taking the tone out of that conversation, I think, is super important, because all too often we have conversations, whether it's with our spouse or with our kids or with a colleague or somebody who reports to you or somebody who you report to, and you have tone with them. You can say anything, but when you say it with tone, it takes a completely different, it takes on a life of its own. So I would simply encourage people to not have tone in their conversations unless they're sure that's the tone that they want to have.
Amen. Before we jumped on this call, we were emailing back and forth, and I just go, picked up the phone. I just go, there's even an email that tone can come across, and it's
Especially
perceived.
email.
Yeah, it's perceived tone, but that person didn't mean that. So pick up the freaking phone and call the person, whether it's in text message or email. Whether you intended it or didn't intend it, that tone can come across. So pick up the phone first, take a breath, then pick up the phone and call the person. So just believe also that the person intended that with love and empathy, and they didn't intend it that way. Now they may have, but don't assume that they meant it that way, and then have that conversation. So I love that. Very well said. All right, we'll end on a fun one. Good. All right, what is your favorite car?
The Lincoln Continental with the suicide doors.
Oh, that's a good one. No one said that one. I've asked
That's
this multiple times. No one's answer that one.
that's just, I mean, I'm like the cobbler's son has no shoes. Like, cars have never been a thing for me. I'd much rather talk about a boat. But as far as, the design and the suicide doors are just cool. I
Yeah,
mean, they're just cool. And I don't know why more car makers don't do them even now, because they're fun and they're
yeah.
cool, and I think it's easier to get in and out of the back seat, and there's all kinds of reasons why. But that's my answer to your question.
Okay, so hold up. We got to end on one last question. What's your favorite boat? You said you're more of a boat person, obviously. So you have a
Oh
favorite boat?
gosh, boats are like shoes, Brooke. Right?
Oh, I know shoes. So yeah.
You need different boats for different occasions, right? You have to have more than one. You can't just have one boat.
Well, I know that
Uh,
feeling as well. So yeah.
So it depends on the conditions. It depends on where
Okay.
you live. It depends on what you're going to do with it. Are you just using it for weekends? Are you living on it? Are you going to Bermuda on it from where I am, which is Bermuda's 600 miles due east of where I
Okay.
am. So, and I have been to Bermuda on a boat before. So it really depends on like it's like shoes. Sometimes you need hiking shoes, sometimes you need 4-inch heels. I don't need 4-inch heels, but you might.
No judgment, no judgment on the show. No judgment.
Judgment-free zone.
Oh, Tom. Well, thank you, Tom. It has been such a pleasure to have you on the show. So appreciate it. Everyone, like I said, if you've not had a chance to sit down and chat with this man, well, you just did. You just did, ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
He is a brilliant human being. Like I said, we had way more to discuss. We could definitely make this a part 2 or part 3 or part 4 at this point. So much knowledge, and there's so much more to discuss. If you should already be pretty much done with this. If you haven't, reach out to this man. He can definitely get you set up with whatever you need to get you pointed in the right direction. And everyone, thank you so much for joining. I know you've got a choice to listen and watch whatever and however you want, wherever you want to watch. I so appreciate it. And as always, find a way to serve today. Help your neighbor, help your colleague, whether it's a kind smile, whether it's opening a door for someone, just find a way to serve someone a day. And with that, everyone, we will see everyone next week.
Thank you.